My name is Brent Edmondson, and I'm the principal bass of the Lancaster Symphony. Today we're going to talk about the bass, we're going to talk about me, and the way that those two things intersect. I started playing the bass when I was 16. I had been playing piano and guitar prior to that, but I was starting to get into the bass guitar and listening to a lot of the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Cream, things like that. And I was starting to get into classical music because I had heard a CD called East Meets West with Ravi Shankar and Yehudi Menuhin. And I cannot possibly summarize the profound effect that hearing that recording had on me. I started out wanting to play the violin, but it was pretty clear that starting at 16, I wasn't going to be a very good violinist. So I looked at which sections of the orchestra had the most graduating seniors, and sure enough, it was the bass. So ever since then, I've been pursuing this instrument, but I've also been learning things like guitar, cello, mandolin, ukulele, erhu, and my particular favorite these days is synthesizers, which I own a few of. I really wouldn't choose another instrument over the bass because the bass has been a great conduit for me to expand into all these other instruments and musical genres that I'm interested in these days. I did my schooling at Temple University and Boston University. I found out after I had matriculated at Boston that actually the bass playing style of Philadelphia and of Boston are about as opposite as they could possibly be. And of course that meant that while I was a student in Boston and when I was first moved back to Philadelphia, people didn't really understand what I was going for or what my skill sets were designed for. Over time, it's enabled me to be very diverse and to have a lot of skills that I bring to bear on the orchestra. One of my favorite things about playing an orchestra is that the bass section is really the rhythm section of all the stringed instruments. And what I mean by that is we control the pacing, we control the timing of the whole right half of the stage, and we really assert a lot of influence over whether the music feels like it's leaning forward and it's moving ahead, or whether it's holding back and it has a heaviness to it. And one of my favorite things as a principal bass player is to exert that influence over the orchestra and subtly shape the timing and make a new element to the performance. So I had a question about how much I practice, and I'll be honest with you, in the pandemic, I haven't been doing as much focused practice as I normally would, but when I'm preparing for an audition, I'm usually trying to get about 3 hours a day of practice in. And in addition to that, I'm also looking at recordings that I've made of myself, as well as listening to great orchestras playing the pieces that I want to work on to help shape my interpretation as well as my performance of those works. Normally, in the course of life, you're not always auditioning for things, and it's okay to allow your practicing to drop back to a manageable level. After all, we're all humans and we need to have a life outside of just playing our instrument. You know, the bass is not a solo instrument per se, although I've been very fortunate to perform a concerto with the Lancaster Symphony, as well as playing most of the major orchestra solos, including the Mahler First Symphony bass solo, Ginastera's Variations Concertantes, Pulcinella solo by Stravinsky, and many others. The bass doesn't really get a lot of opportunities to play as a soloist. It has two identities. There's the orchestra mentality, which is playing in the lower registers and supporting the rest of the orchestra. And the solo repertoire that we rely on is largely borrowed from other instruments, including the cello, violin, and many other instruments. And that's really what a lot of bass players work on to develop their musicality and their interpretive skills. The bass that I play on back here is made in 2013 by Mike Shank, who is a local of Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania. And I'm extremely proud that my bass comes from Lancaster County. In addition to being married to somebody from Lancaster, I really think that there's something about craftsmanship that is built into the mentality of the region. And I love this bass with all my heart. I will never sell it. It is as much a part of me as my physical body is. Among my musical heroes, I would certainly count my teacher, Hal Robinson, who's principal bass of the Philadelphia Orchestra. Hal is somebody who, even in his 60s, is continuing to improve himself as a musician and as a technician on the bass. And that's just not a trajectory that you see a lot of musicians have. So it's very exciting to me to know that there isn't a time limit on how long I have to improve myself. And in addition to that, he's just the nicest guy. He's confident in a way that makes it feel okay for everybody else to be confident around him. They don't have to tuck their ego into his. He's just a great, positive guy, and I love him with all my heart. Outside of my own personal experiences, my other musical hero is Richard Wagner. Now, I realize that's a bit of a controversial statement. Wagner has a lot of social stigmas around him because, quite frankly, he was a dirtbag. But for all that, as an artist, he really set the standard for what an artist could be in the 20th century. He was very forward-looking, and his plan to take opera from this collection of songs and melodies to this complete artwork with drama and costume and visuals really looked forward to cinema and the development of movies, and also set the bar incredibly high for opera composers since then. And I just have so much respect for somebody who, in spite of all of his personal shortcomings, was able to be an artist of such enduring quality and power. I gotta be honest, I don't spend a lot of time listening to classical music outside of my work, although my favorite composers when I do listen to classical music outside of the orchestra repertoire would be Wagner again, but also Debussy, Ravel, and Erik Satie. The French Impressionist period really does a lot for me spiritually and emotionally, and I'm just so infatuated with the tone colors that they were able to create and pull out of instruments that had been in use continuously for hundreds of years before that. When I'm not listening to classical music, though, my favorite groups would be Radiohead, Bon Iver, Thom Yorke. I'm really grown to love electronic music and things that are artificial by design, things that could never be made on an acoustic instrument, mainly because I play an acoustic instrument and I've explored a lot of the options and possibilities with that. And it just intrigues me that there are sounds beyond the ones that you're capable of making happen in real life. In orchestra, my favorite things to play are any pieces that have a bass excerpt in them. It's not that I'm such an excerpt jock that I really need to feel that pull of excitement of having worked on a piece for a long time. But what it does mean is when you finally get to that moment, you can cut loose. You can give all of your heart and energy to that excerpt and really be focused on connecting with your other musicians, connecting with the conductor, connecting with the audience, instead of having your head buried in the music and focusing on playing the right notes. My favorite venue in the world is undoubtedly Suntory Hall in Tokyo. I've been lucky to perform there twice in my life, and one of those times was with Yannick Nézet-Séguin and the Philadelphia Orchestra playing Mahler's Fifth Symphony, which we would have been playing this week in the Lancaster Symphony. And it's hard to say exactly what it is about that venue that I'm so infatuated with. I think it's the acoustics, but it's also the enthusiasm of the Japanese audiences that I've performed for. There's a quiet intensity during the entire piece, and then at the end, when everything has happened, the entire hall just erupts into applause almost at once, and then cuts off again just as suddenly. It's a surreal experience that it's hard to imagine taking place in America, but it's extremely gratifying. My favorite soloist I've ever performed with is Leonidas Kavakos. I was fortunate to play the Sibelius Violin Concerto with him with the Philadelphia Orchestra. This is one of Leonidas's signature pieces, and his interpretation is just head and shoulders above anybody else I've ever heard play the piece. His control and the sound shaping are unbelievable, and I've been so inspired by that performance ever since. It's something that I seek: the spontaneity, the control, the sincere music making. All of it is just so moving to me. At this point, I'm supposed to talk about an embarrassing musical story that is kid friendly. And I thought a lot about this, and I think that it'd be more interesting to talk about all the near misses. You know, there have been times with the Lancaster Symphony as well as other orchestras that I play with where I have arrived at the gig and realized I'd forgotten my bow. Facebook reminded me recently that almost 10 years ago, I actually locked my bass in the car right before a gig, and I had to have the police come and open the door. That actually ended up happening after the concert had already taken place, but fortunately, this was at a high school, and they were able to find a bass within the school to allow me to play. I have forgotten every element of my tuxedo possible several times. I've come dressed in the wrong tuxedo jacket. I've come dressed in a white jacket when it's supposed to be black, and vice versa. And what's really incredible about all these experiences is that every single time, my colleagues have always had my back. If I forgot a bow, somebody had a spare bow that I could borrow. If I forgot a piece of my tuxedo, there was one in a locker backstage that I was able to use. It's been a real learning experience about the kinds of things you need to be armed with. And believe me, I carry several spare bow ties in the car now as a matter of habit. But what's really incredible is that musicians are always willing to help you out because they all know what it's like. They've all been there before. It's so important to put aside all the competitive things that happen in life and really focus on how the whole of the orchestra can come together and benefit one another. And that brings me to what the Lancaster Symphony means to me, which is probably the most important thing that I will tell you on this video. I joined the Lancaster Symphony in 2011. I've played almost every concert ever since then. And in addition to the fact that I met my wife in the violin section of the Lancaster Symphony, so many of the people that I play with are so dear to me as not only colleagues but friends now. It's really been this incredible growth of my musical family. And those people are the ones that get me gigs elsewhere. They're the ones that make me feel better when the gigs that we're on aren't going the way we want them to. And they're the people that are going to be there for me no matter what happens to me, up to and including this pandemic. The Lancaster Symphony is a family, and we share this family relationship with the audience in every concert that we put on. As a member, as a part of the union, as a part of the musicians committee, you know, it really excites me to be able to share this and to be able to speak directly to the audience for a change. Of course, I am the lecturer, so I do get a few opportunities that other people don't necessarily get in terms of speaking directly to the audience. But what this is really about is taking ownership of the Lancaster Symphony as musicians and becoming an ensemble that's deeply relevant to Lancaster, deeply relevant to the people that come to see us, and deeply relevant to the people that don't yet realize that they're Lancaster Symphony appreciators. The Lancaster Symphony is about the people. It's about the musicians on stage who work day jobs, do whatever they have to do to make sure that they're sitting in that seat to make beautiful music for the audience. It's about the patrons who come to the Fulton Opera House and enjoy live music on stage. It's about every single element of that equation. And I know that we can't connect right now in person, and that's why it's so important to make videos like this, to reach out and to find ways to connect despite our limitations. Because what I miss the most when it comes to all this is being there with people. It's sharing this love, this excitement, this enthusiasm for art music, for the great masterworks of the classical music canon, but also just the fun, the camaraderie, the light competition that is playing music in an orchestra. I miss it so much, and I'm really excited for the day when we're able to open our doors back to our audience and collaborate again in making beautiful things happen. I hope you've enjoyed watching this. Please consider supporting the Lancaster Symphony, my fellow musicians, and stay safe, stay healthy, be well.